Peace and welcome. Today we will be ranking our favorite soundtracks of 2020. We went through about 700 or 800 games, so there will be a lot that do not make the cut. For our guidelines, we will of course say only one per franchise, and re-releases do not qualify unless the soundtrack was redone. A good example would be Cuphead. It came out in 2020 on the PS4, but the original was in 2017 on the Xbox One. So let's get this underway. Number 10, Cyberpunk 2077. A game that was hyped up like no other in recent years, and upon release was full of glitches, bugs, and all sorts of problems. One thing that was not a problem, however, was the music. I heard a lot of complaints, but not a single one about the soundtrack. It's not the greatest, some parts do feel a little repetitive, and some tracks sound similar to others. I can't always tell when one track ends and the next one begins. There are a lot of ambient beats, and I do like that, but they all sound quite similar. With that being said, it's still rather good. It fits the feel of the game, and who doesn't like a cyberpunk universe? Number 9, Paper Mario: The Origami King. A soundtrack that contains 5 different composers who produced over 240 different tracks. You can find some of the reoccurring themes of the franchise, for example, Peach's Castle or the classic Underground theme. There are also hundreds of original themes. It's a massive project, and that's what really separates it. There is a nice mix of styles and genres. You can find dark, spooky, sneaky, jazzy, or even an old western style. I could go on for quite a while listing all of the genres. This score is not really like all of the other Mario soundtracks because a lot of the tracks have an Asian sound. I heard many Japanese instruments, from a shamisen to a shakuhachi, which both have a very distinct sound. One of my personal favorites gets a bad rap, but it gives me the feel of an old kung fu movie, and, to be honest, it's oddly familiar, so you may just see this one in a future episode. Number 8, Doom Eternal. If you like metal, then this soundtrack is for you. This is a project that you can tell had time and effort put into it. This was not hastily thrown together. Mick Gordon, the composer of the soundtrack, took this seriously and produced an epic score. This is easily one of the best of the year. I think if someone didn't include this in their top 10, maybe they aren't metal fans or they just plain forgot about it. The amount of effort Mick Gordon put into this deserves to be noticed. I can tell you he brought in an entire heavy metal choir. It was a very diverse group, including a Mongolian metal singer who brought that Mongolian throat singing style. If you like metal, this soundtrack is worth checking out. Number 7, Hades. The easiest way to sum up this soundtrack is the word unique. There are plenty of themes that are difficult to classify. Some have almost a tribal or Celtic feel, some are metal, while others sound like a hippie jam session. Lots of guitars, percussions, and some synths every now and then. At times the vibe can get a little dark, but this is a game called Hades after all. The soundtrack is a 2 CD set with a total of 30 tracks. Overall, it's a solid soundtrack. There really are no weak themes, so it's a clean listen all the way through. Composed by Darren Korb, this is only the 4th video game he has composed for, with the first in 2011. IMDb has this game under 2018, but that was just the early access release. We are allowing this one because it was officially released on September 17th, 2020. Number 6. Genshin Impact. Composed by Yu Peng Chen, from Shanghai, China, of the musical team Hoyo Mix. Genshin Impact is a fantasy RPG that's free to play, and you can find it on PC, PS4, PS5, Nintendo Switch, and mobile devices. The score itself contains well over 100 tracks, with a duration of nearly 4 hours, and there is a diverse mix. The main 2 instruments that catch my ear are his pianos and flutes. The composer knows how to play really well. Overall, it has a classical music vibe, and it reminds me of many other RPG soundtracks. Not one specifically, but just the general feel. And don't get me wrong, it's not generic. It's a pleasant listen with many themes worth listening to. And better yet, if you play the game and get the full experience. Some soundtracks are that much better when you get the story along with the music. Number 5. Trials of Mana. The score, composed by Hiroki Kikuta, was arranged by a small team with Kikuta supervising. The soundtrack contains 60 different tracks, but for some reason it's missing the title screen theme. So that's what we'll play right now. The 3rd game in the Mana series and the sequel to The Secret of Mana. This 3D remake of the 1995 Super Famicom game has an all-new arranged soundtrack. Most of the tracks were produced with synthesized instruments, but a few of the tracks are recordings of a full-fledged orchestra. Another bonus point for this entry is the fact they included the original version of the soundtrack as well. I would like it if more companies did this with their remakes. It doesn't take up that much more memory, so please include both. The original score comes from the Super Nintendo, and it has that sound one would expect from the console. However, this one is completely next level. Not only is this a good soundtrack, it's exceptional, and one of the best of the year. Number 4. Streets of Rage 4. This one is plain and simple. It would have been higher on the top 10 if it had more tracks composed by Yuzo. The main soundtrack was composed by Olivier de Rivière, while the boss fights had different composers, including Yuzo Koshiro, Motohiro Kawashima, Yoko Shimomura, and more. I was glad to see Yuzo return in at least some capacity, although I would have liked to hear more tracks by him. It was also nice to see the return of Motohiro, who worked on Streets of Rage 3. And then on top of that, you add in Yoko, who just happens to be a favorite composer of many people, me included. There were also rumors that Hideki Naganuma was going to produce some tracks for the game, but he wasn't able to join the team due to scheduling conflicts. His style is quite a bit different, so I don't know how it would have sounded. But he is a fantastic composer, so I have no doubt he would have fit right in. If there were more Yuzo tracks, more Yoko tracks, and the inclusion of Hideki Naganuma, that might have been enough to push it to the #1 soundtrack of the year. Where it stands now, it's still enjoyable. And on top of all that, they included the original soundtracks to Streets of Rage 1 and 2. The soundtrack had a limited run game's vinyl release, and if you paid a little extra, you could even get an autographed copy. There was also a 15-track CD which was included with the physical release from limited run games. And it included an additional remix by T. Lopez, who we will end up getting to someday in our series that covers remixes and covers by fans. All of these factors make it one of my favorites of the year. So now we enter our top 3. And in at our bronze position, the number 3 OST of 2020, we have Ori and the Will of the Wisps. A soundtrack that contains a total of 60 themes, with music by Gareth Coker and various features on songs here and there. Most of the tracks do not feature vocals, but there are a few with some mixed in. This is what a soundtrack is supposed to do. And I don't mean just a game soundtrack, but movies and shows as well. It's supposed to submerge you into it. It takes you to their universe where you become invested in the situations and the characters, their fortunes, as well as their misfortunes. A good soundtrack doesn't just make you feel connected to it, but it should almost engulf you, and that's why this soundtrack is so high on our list. It almost reminds me of the soundtrack to Echo CD. There are a few themes in there that brought it to mind, and plus the way it fits into the game. The first word that comes to mind when I think of this soundtrack overall is tranquil. And that's not to say there are only mellow themes on the soundtrack. There are definitely some tracks that aren't, but those are so good, they are the first ones that I think about. And now our silver position. The number 2 OST of 2020 comes from Ghost of Tsushima. So being part Japanese, this music is normal to me. I have heard music just like this ever since I was a kid. My grandmother played music exactly like this. Take a shamisen and add in some modern instruments like a violin. And to top it off, I even heard some Mongolian throat singing mixed in there. Ghost of Tsushima is the tale of a Mongolian invasion to the non-fictional island of Tsushima, Japan. So having Japanese instruments mixed with some Mongolian, in my opinion, was a nice effect. I really enjoy this soundtrack. To me, it's like comfort music. Some people have comfort food that makes them feel nostalgic. Maybe grandma's home cooking when you were growing up. Well, for me, this is a lot like that, but the music form of it. Plus, you combine all of that with a great game that the music just magnifies. The emotions of the scenes in the game and the music that accompanies it are a perfect blend. Also, this soundtrack at certain times reminds me of Tenchu. And not just because it's a game with samurai and ninja with Japanese music, but the way the composers took some traditional instruments and mixed them with some modern sounds. In my opinion, this is one of the best soundtracks of 2020. and our gold medal position. A soundtrack that, in our opinion, is the best of the year 2020. In at number 1, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I was hesitant to put this one at the top spot because the score is a remake of the original. However, after really listening to the music again, it's epic and it deserves it. I think the composer Nobuo Uematsu was in his prime when he produced the original soundtrack. And now that he isn't limited on memory and he isn't forced to use MIDI like the PS1 game, this really lets his music shine. The original composer doing a remaster of one of the greatest soundtracks in gaming. And yes, I did say the Final Fantasy VII OST is one of the tops. The PS1 was a little bit of a bridge console. The generation before it was all chiptune and had games that were about 5 megabytes for the entire thing, while the generation after was DVD and could easily be over 4 gigabytes per game. The difference isn't only noticeable in the graphics, but the sound effects and especially the music as well. You can find the remake soundtrack in a 7 CD set with a bonus 8th CD. In total, it contains 180 tracks. A hefty soundtrack that's full of some of the best music of any game. Before we leave, we do have some news. We are opening a Discord for public use. You can join and submit anything oddly familiar, or submit themes for a top 10, or just join to chat. Check the description for the link. As far as Patreon goes, there is still the patron-only Discord. Also, we will be doing some exclusive remixes and some Let's Play videos, but you will need to be a patron to listen and watch. Join for as low as $1 per month. We will get around to doing a top 10 for each year. We will start at 2020 and work our way backwards. But for now, our next top 10 is jungle themes. So until then, huge thanks to gold level patrons Bearsona, Quantum X, and Chris Hayes. I am ICC. Thanks for watching. Peace.